Right now in America, the top 1% of households own more wealth than the entire bottom 90% of the population combined. Let that number sit for a second. 1% of people. More wealth than 90% of everyone else, put together. That is not a statistic from a protest sign. That is not political spin. That is the current data from the Federal Reserve's own wealth distribution report. And here's the question nobody asks loudly enough. How did that happen? In the wealthiest country in human history, with more opportunity, more innovation, and more productivity than any civilization that has ever existed, how did 1% of the population end up owning more than virtually everyone else combined? The answer is not luck. It is not intelligence. It is not harder work. It is a system, built deliberately, maintained carefully, and designed to make sure the gap between the top and everyone else keeps growing, not shrinking. In this video, we are going to show you exactly how that system works, who built it, and what it means for any chance you have of ever building real wealth in your lifetime. Welcome to Broke by Design. Before we talk about how the wealth gap was built, we need to understand exactly how large it is, because most people dramatically underestimate it. The top 1% of American households currently hold approximately $44 trillion in wealth. The bottom 50%, 65 million households, hold approximately $3.5 trillion combined. The top 1% holds 12 times more wealth than the entire bottom half of the country, but it goes further than that. The top 0.1%, that's 1 in 1,000 households, now controls approximately 18% of all wealth in America, more than the bottom 80% combined. And the gap is not staying the same, it is widening every single year. In 1989, the top 1% held about 24% of total wealth. By 2007, that had grown to 33%. By 2023, it had reached 38%. The trajectory is clear and it is not reversing. Now here's the part that makes this more than just an uncomfortable statistic. The wealth gap is not just a measure of how much money different people have. It is a measure of power. Political power. Economic power. The power to shape the rules of the system itself. When the top 1% controls 38% of all wealth, they also control the largest political donations, the most influential lobbying groups, the boards of the largest corporations, the editorial positions of the most powerful media companies, the ability to shape tax policy, regulatory frameworks, and economic priorities in ways that ordinary people simply cannot. The wealth gap is not just a number, it is a feedback loop. More wealth means more power to accumulate more wealth. And the people at the top of that loop have spent decades making sure it keeps spinning in their favor. So how did the top 1% build this much wealth while everyone else fell behind? Not through harder work, not through superior intelligence, through 4 specific mechanisms built into the system that consistently transfer wealth upward regardless of what the economy is doing. Mechanism 1, they own assets that compound. You own time that doesn't. This is the most fundamental difference between how wealthy people and ordinary people build, or fail to build, wealth. The average American worker's primary source of income is their labor. They trade hours for dollars, and time is finite. You can work more hours, but there is a ceiling. You cannot work 200 hours a week. Your income is capped by your time. The wealthy do not primarily earn through labor. They earn through ownership. Stocks that pay dividends and appreciate in value. Real estate that generates rental income and grows in value. Businesses that produce profit whether the owner is working or sleeping. Intellectual property that generates royalties indefinitely. These assets compound. A $1 million stock portfolio growing at 10% per year generates $100,000 without a single hour of work. The following year it generates $110,000. The year after $121,000. The math accelerates automatically. Meanwhile, the worker who earned $100,000 that same year has to work just as hard the following year to earn $100,000 again. Their income doesn't compound, it resets. This is not a moral judgment, it is a mathematical reality. And it means that without owning assets, without converting labor income into ownership, the gap between workers and owners grows automatically every single year, even when nobody is doing anything wrong. Mechanism 2, the tax code was written for them, not you. Here is something that should make every working American furious. The United States tax code taxes labor income, the kind most people earn, at rates up to 37%. Capital gains income, the kind wealthy people primarily earn through asset appreciation, is taxed at a maximum of 20%. Think about what that means in practice. A nurse earning $150,000 per year pays a higher tax rate on her income than a hedge fund manager earning $150 million from investment gains. But it goes further. Wealthy individuals and corporations employ armies of tax attorneys and accountants specifically to find deductions, deferrals, and structures that reduce their effective tax rate dramatically below even the statutory rates. The ProPublica tax records leak revealed that many of America's wealthiest individuals, including some of the richest people on Earth, paid effective federal income tax rates in the low single digits or even zero in certain years. Meanwhile, the average working American has taxes withheld automatically from every paycheck, with almost no ability to reduce their burden through complex structures. The system wasn't designed to be this way by accident. It was designed this way by people who benefited from it being this way. Mechanism 3. They borrow to build wealth. You borrow to survive. This is perhaps the least understood mechanism of wealth concentration, and one of the most powerful. Wealthy individuals and corporations use debt as a tool to amplify returns. They borrow at low interest rates to purchase assets that generate higher returns than the interest cost. A real estate investor borrows at 5% to purchase properties generating 10% returns. The 5% spread, multiplied across millions of dollars of borrowed capital, generates wealth at a scale impossible to achieve with just personal savings. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans borrow primarily to cover consumption, credit cards at 20% plus interest to cover the gap between income and the rising cost of living, student loans to pay for credentials required to get jobs that barely keep pace with inflation, car loans to afford transportation to those jobs. This debt doesn't build wealth, it drains it. The wealthy use debt to get richer. Everyone else uses debt to stay afloat. Same tool, opposite outcomes. And the financial system, which profits from both, is perfectly happy to keep it this way. Mechanism 4. They shape the rules while you were busy working. This is the mechanism that makes the other three permanent. Between 1998 and 2022, corporations and wealthy individuals spent over $10 billion on lobbying the US federal government. That investment bought specific policy outcomes: tax cuts weighted toward capital income, deregulation of financial markets, trade policies that benefited corporations over workers, weakened antitrust enforcement that allowed market concentration to grow unchecked. The top 0.01% of income earners donate approximately 40% of all political contributions in federal elections. They are not donating out of civic spirit. They are investing in policy outcomes. And the return on that investment, measured in tax savings, favorable regulations, and protected market positions, is extraordinarily high. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented. Academic research by Princeton and Northwestern universities, published in 2014, found that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impact on US government policy, while average citizens and mass-based interest groups have little or no independent influence. The people at the top of the wealth distribution are not just winning the economic game, they are writing the rules of it, and they write those rules to ensure the game keeps producing the same results. If you want to understand how the wealth gap accelerates, look at what happens during economic crises. Because while crises devastate ordinary people, they consistently create extraordinary wealth for those at the top. During the 2008 financial crisis, triggered largely by reckless behavior in the financial system, the US government spent approximately $700 billion bailing out the banks whose behavior caused the crisis. Millions of ordinary Americans lost their homes, their jobs, and their retirement savings. The banks recovered. Their executives kept their bonuses. The system was preserved for the people who owned it. During the COVID pandemic of 2020, while small businesses closed permanently, while workers lost jobs, while families burned through savings to survive lockdowns, US billionaire wealth increased by $1.3 trillion in the first year alone. The stock market, which the wealthy predominantly own, recovered within months, while the real economy took years. The K-shaped recovery we covered in our inflation video was never more visible than in 2020. Every crisis. Same pattern. The wealthy have the capital reserves, the political connections, and the asset ownership to not just survive economic disasters, but to profit from them. Distressed assets become available at discount prices. Competitors go bankrupt. Government intervention stabilizes the assets they own, while the losses fall on those who can least afford them. So given that the wealth gap is this large, this entrenched, and this deliberately maintained, what does someone who isn't in the top 1% actually do? First, stop playing the game by the rules designed to keep you losing. The primary financial advice given to working Americans, work hard, save money, live within your means, is not wrong. but it is incomplete in a way that keeps you permanently behind. Saving cash that inflation erodes is not wealth building. Working harder for a salary with a ceiling is not wealth building. Avoiding all debt is not wealth building if the alternative is never owning assets. The people who escape the bottom 90% and build real wealth do so by converting their labor income into ownership as early and as consistently as possible. Not all at once. Not through get-rich-quick schemes, but steadily and deliberately, buying assets that compound over time. Second, use the same tools the wealthy use, scaled to your reality. You cannot borrow $50 million to buy a commercial real estate portfolio, but you can invest $50 a month in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund and own a tiny piece of the 500 largest companies in America. You cannot hire a team of tax attorneys, but you can maximize your 401k and IRA contributions and legally shelter tens of thousands of dollars from taxation every year. You cannot start a billion-dollar company, but you can build skills, side income, and small ownership positions that compound over time. The mechanism that makes the wealthy richer, compounding ownership, is available to you. The scale is different. The principle is identical. Third, understand the system clearly enough to stop blaming yourself for its outcomes. The wealth gap is not primarily the result of poor people making bad decisions. It is the result of a system specifically designed to concentrate wealth at the top, through tax structures, through asset ownership dynamics, through political influence, and through the compounding mathematics of capital versus labor. Knowing this doesn't change the rules overnight, but it changes how you play. Instead of trying to out-earn your way to wealth through labor alone, which the system makes nearly impossible, you focus on ownership, on tax efficiency, on building assets that work while you sleep, on playing the actual game instead of the version you were told you were playing. Let's bring it all together. Across the last 5 videos, we have shown you that inflation quietly erodes your money by design, that the housing market was priced out of reach by forces that benefited from keeping you renting, that the middle class is collapsing under the weight of stagnant wages and exploding costs, that the national debt, $36 trillion and growing, will be paid for by ordinary people through inflation, higher taxes, and reduced services. And now you know who sits at the other end of all of those transfers. The top 1%. Who own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined? Who built that position through asset ownership, favorable tax structures, political influence, and the compounding mathematics of capital? Who benefit from inflation that erodes cash while their assets rise? Who benefit from housing unaffordability while they own the properties you rent? Who benefit from the debt that funds the system while they hold the bonds that earn the interest? This is not a conspiracy. It is arithmetic. It is documented. It is the logical outcome of a system built to produce exactly these results. And this is what Broke by Design is here to show you. Not to make you angry for the sake of anger, not to make you feel hopeless, but to make you see the system clearly enough to navigate it, and to stop mistaking its outcomes for your personal failures. The game is rigged, but you are allowed to play it smarter. Subscribe if across these 5 videos we changed how you see the world you live in. Share this with someone who is working hard and wondering why it never seems to be enough. Now you both know why. We'll see you next week.